It seems we're living longer and doing better than any other time in history. So why are we still afraid of aging? Our guest today, ageism activist Ashton Applewhite, says it's not the passage of time that makes it so hard to get older, it's ageism, a prejudice that pits us against our future selves and each other. Aging isn't a problem to be solved, or a disease to be cured, or something icky that old people do. It's how we move through life, and more of us are doing more of it than ever before in human history. And that's also why, according to a 2021 United Nations report on ageism, swift action to implement effective anti-ageism strategies is needed. It seems that every second person in the world is believed to hold ageist attitudes, leading to poorer physical and mental health and reduced quality of life for older persons, which in turn is costing societies billions of dollars each year. Lucky for us, Ashton's here to help us dismantle the dread and mobilise against the last socially acceptable prejudice. Hello and welcome to another episode of Ironing Out the Wrinkles. I'm your host, Ros McMaster. My co-host, Kate Shaw, is not able to be with us today. Now, normally Kate would say at this point, we're taking the age out of ageism, and I know Ashton is going to tell us why that catchphrase is part of the problem. So Ashton is an internationally recognized expert on ageism. She's the author of This Chair Rocks, a manifesto against ageism, is co-founder of the Old School Anti-Ageism Clearinghouse, that's a big mouthful, speaks widely at venues that have included the TED main stage and the United Nations, is at the forefront of the emerging movement to raise awareness of ageism and to dismantle it. And in 2022, the Decade of Healthy Aging, which is a UN and World Health Organization collaboration, named Ashton one of the Healthy Aging 50 leaders transforming the world to be a better place to grow older. What a resume, Ashton. I know, me too. That was fabulous. But your book, I can't believe, all the people that I've spoken to, I was so excited about Ashton Applewhite coming on the podcast. And I met so many people who said, yeah, I have a book. It's up here on the bookshelf. So it's very...
Yeah, I did a tour of Australia in November 2019, just before the pandemic struck. And it's been wonderful to see, social change is slow and hard, and we are all ageist. We all have these attitudes, negative, generally attitudes about later life, come at us from childhood on. And unless we stop to challenge them, they become part of our identity. And so Australia has the first national anti-ageism campaign called Every Age Counts. And it's really wonderful to see those efforts bearing fruit. And the reason I know that it is the old school clearinghouse is a mouthful, but the idea behind the clearinghouse is it's a repository for all anti-ageist information, especially campaigns, but videos, podcasts, people talking about ageism, what it smells like, what it quacks like, what we can do about it. And you can find Every Age Counts on the Old School Clearinghouse, so oldschool.info. And I know that these good things are happening in Australia because we have them on the clearinghouse. So I can see that they're actually mounting up actual campaigns. It's very exciting.
That is exciting. And like at the moment, it might seem a little bit tokenistic, but, I can see, in the workplace even, I mean, we've still got a long way to go, but we have to start somewhere, don't we?
Exactly. I think, it's never too late in life, and you can't start too small. It can seem very daunting, and it is if you think, we're going to change the whole culture. But even if I'll finish the sentence, even if all we do is think a little bit differently about how we use the word age, how we use the words old and young, even that small act, and it's not easy, to rethink beliefs you've had all your life, changes you, even in a tiny way. And then you are different when you're out in the world. And that is how we change the world, bit by bit by bit.
Yeah, and I think I heard you say once before, someone else asked you, well, we're not there yet with ageism and sexism. How are we going to go with not ageism, racism?
Yeah.
We've got a long way still to go, even though we've been fighting for so long for against racism and sexism. But ageism's relatively new, isn't it? It hasn't been around that long.
Well, the word was coined by a wonderful physician whom I had the privilege of meeting in the last few years of his life, named Dr. Robert Butler, in 1968, during the heyday of the American Civil Rights Movement, to piggyback quite deliberately on racism and on sexism. The second wave mainstream women's movement was gaining steam. So the word has been around for a long time. I think it is only now really sort of percolating into public awareness, but I think it's important to see it, to see all these prejudices as a piece, because all prejudice operates in the same way, to pit people against each other who might otherwise join forces, right, and challenge the status quo. And so it's not, we're never going to get rid of them. We can't think of it in terms of a fixed endpoint, but working against any form of prejudice, in doing so, you chip away at the fear and ignorance that underlie them all. Working to make the better world a better world in which to not be white is also a better world in which to not be young. It's also a better world in which to have a disability, right? So the growing awareness of these other forms of prejudice, we're not starting from zero with ageism, right? We are, I'll use that word, piggybacking again, piggybacking on this growing awareness of the way these prejudices compound and inform each other. And activism is intersectional also, right? When we chip away at any of it. So I take great hope in the fact, I do think it's a fact, that we're not starting from zero, teaching people what an entrenched prejudice is. That awareness is much more accessible broadly.
Yeah. So let's start with I think just at a ground level, what are we doing as individuals that are colluding in the whole narrative around ageism? And as we get older, what are older people even doing? And young people.
Well, yeah. So two important points there you touched on. Um, the World Health Organization, does have this fabulous anti-ageism campaign, which you can find on the Old School Clearinghouse at oldschool.info, one-stop shopping. And they talk about ageism in terms of how we think, feel, and act about age and aging. So beliefs, stereotypes, discrimination. It was I started out knowing nothing about any of this 15 years ago. And one of the many, many humbling surprises was that older people can be the most ageist of all. And I thought, gee, why, since we are the most affected by it? But ageism is any judgment. We are being ageist anytime we make an assumption about someone on the basis of how old we think they are. And you touched on young people. If you think someone is too young to be competent, if you assume that because they're young, that's ageist too, right? But we live in a very youth-obsessed society, so older people do bear the brunt of it. And I wouldn't single older people out, as particularly implicated in any of this. The most important thing that any of us can do, and it is the essential starting point for all of us, is to look at our own attitudes towards age and aging, and think where they come from, right? And what purpose they serve. And so where when for example, when people, well, I'm in New Zealand right now, and I'm doing and I did a very a hike that was incredibly difficult, but I made it. Almost everyone on the hike was older. And there was a German mother and daughter, and she was probably in her 50s, and her daughter was somewhere in her early 20s. And one of the older people kept talking about how Johanna, look, of course she's, bounding up the mountaintop to the mountaintop. She's so young. Now that's annoying, right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you know the term microaggression. It's come out as I've learned about racism. It's just a needless comment about someone's race that doesn't need being said because it's not relevant. He wouldn't have said, look at her bound up the mountain. She does so well for a girl. Or, she's so German. Look at her jump up there. Yes, age and fitness are correlated. You could expect a younger person to have more stamina, so I don't want to pretend there's no link, but there are 20-year-olds with disabilities who couldn't walk at all. There are 20-something-year-olds who are couch potatoes, and there are 80-somethings who could bound up that mountain also, right? So that's just an example of questioning why does age come to mind? And believe me, it does. For me too. And I've spent a decade trying to sort of purge myself, but someone's dating someone new and I want to know, how old are they?
Yes.
Why is that so important? Why do we live in a culture that foregrounds age in a way that that pigeonholes people? And we all do this. The minute we have a number, we pigeonhole. I would like doctors' charts. Of course, doctors need to know how old you are. It's different treating an older person than a young person. Youth is different from age. But suppose it was on page 2 of your chart, not page 1. Suppose it was on page 2 of your dating profile, not page 1.
Mm.
So that it would be harder for us, all of us, no judgment, to have the assumptions and stereotypes that are in all of our skulls click, 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 click into place the minute we have a number.
At what point does it lapse into being in denial about being older and what comes with being older?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, ageism does take root in denial. Denial of the fact that even though it's not rational, but no prejudice is rational. So, yes, ageism is prejudice against your own future self, but racism is prejudice against your brothers and sisters. So, it's a fool's game to compare them, right? No prejudice is rational. But but ageism does take root in this sort of pretense that it's not going to happen to us. And I think when you're a kid, it's really hard to imagine getting old. And I don't think that's ageism. I think that's human nature. We age slowly. As a kid, I was like, why are all these grown-ups sitting in chairs when they could be running around, right? So part of it is just human, but no one wants to join a community that is stigmatized and that is rendered invisible. So what you see a lot of is marketing. I mean, you see it in so many ways, but you see a tremendous number of products, especially aimed at women, that promise to keep you youthful, that promise to keep you ageless. And that was why I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability, bringing up my probably ham-handed critique of your tagline to take the age out of aging. We need the age in there. We are aging. It's like when we say, youth cream will make you ageless. I want to be ageful.
Mm.
I mean, I'm not saying that will catch on anytime soon as a slogan on a jar of face cream, but I am what I am because of my years, right? As are you. No one actually wants to go back to their youth. So I don't want to support age denial. Let's see how we can work on the forces that claim that those years are without value, because clearly they're enormously valuable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, so you do spend time a lot talking about the beauty industry. And we did an interview actually with someone who works in that industry. And she did say, well, yeah, absolutely. We're making money from the industry because people want to stay younger. But her point was, well, that's the nature of business. You see a need and you say,
Well,
well, I
capitalism,
can satisfy that
of
need.
course. No one
So
makes money off satisfaction. You could say the same thing about the diet industry. When I was 15, I was convinced that the fact that my thighs rubbed together was the, biggest problem in the entire world. And, they still rub together. I'm over it by now. But capitalism, makes money off people, off, by problematizing it in the beauty industry, by problematizing women's, if we appear to visibly age, God forbid, and also by pathologizing, by turning natural transitions into medical problems and I'm not a physician, and I'm not saying you should not take hormones, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have Botox or plastic surgery. You should do whatever you feel is right for you. There are so many voices out there telling women in particular what we should and shouldn't do. So we each need to navigate this stuff in our own way, at our own speed, no judgment. But we can, if we're lucky, stay healthy. We can, do things, I suppose, to make our skin look better. But we can't stay young. Everyone wakes up a day later. And when we buy into this false promise, it's expensive. So there's a huge class bias. There's tons of people who can't afford it. Sometimes it's dangerous. Some of these cosmetic surgeries are not safe. And they set us up to fail, sooner or later. Even if you look younger than most people your age, you are not going to look young anymore. And, we know from 9 zillion Buddhist tracts and self-help manuals that it is, if you're not satisfied with yourself, you're no amount of whatever internal you have to work on it, from the inside out.
Yeah, I just lost you for 1 second there. That's okay. But yes, you do have to work on it from the inside out, because even if you've got Botox and plastic surgery, whatever's driving that fear, as a counselor, I know that, and so many people that I've met, they've grown up in childhoods where even the parents are making, creating that body image, negative body image, and a belief that you've got to look a certain way and to feel a certain way.
That way, in quotes, is typically thin, paler skinned, blonde, male, heterosexual. I mean, there is a norm there's no norm, but there is an ideal. If you look at the people who have the most privilege under capitalism in the West, they are the people who are educated, who are thin, who are tall, who are male, who are all these things, so that it pits. And that's a good way, if you can think about that. I actually have a diagram on my computer that, has it's like a pizza, all these different charts, and at the most is a high level of education, and then less and less as it goes out from the center, speaks excellent English or the language of the country where you are, and then speaks pretty good, and then speaks with an accent, and then doesn't speak it well at all. And as you can see, all these different vectors of privilege combine, and age is one of them. But age is unique in that we all age, and we all encounter ageism.
Yeah. So what can be done from a bigger societal kind of perspective, and government? What can they do about ageism? Or is it
Well,
an individual fight?
I'm not a government official. It depends on what the government priorities are. I do think Australia has a terrific example in Every Age Counts. If you look at and go to their site, and if you can't remember Every Age Counts, oldschool.info, look up Australia, it's searchable. What we want to do as activists is, of course, influence public policy. It was the World Health Organization, not the World Old People Organization, that launched a global campaign to combat ageism in spring, now almost 2 years ago, because they realized that the biggest obstacle to increasing health span, along with lifespan, right, the number of years we spend in active and as good health as possible, was not antibiotics, not clean water, ageism, age bias between our worlds and between our ears, and also embedded in our, government policies, in our urban design. It is everywhere, just like racism, just like ableism, which is prejudice against people whose minds and bodies might not function at the center of that wheel of everything being easy, blonde, and thin.
Yeah, because I mean, mindset's so important to do with health, isn't it? So if we have a negative view about aging ourselves, that's going to create stress in the body at a cellular level. And
Really interesting research there. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because attitude is very important, but I think it's important not to fall into a bit of the trap that if you just, have the right attitude and eat enough kale, and I know that's not what you're saying, Rosalind, but you'll be fine, or there's a right way to do it. We tend, especially under capitalism and under neoliberalism, which puts all this responsibility on the individual. If you're starting to look your age, well, you should, do some sit-ups and use a better skin cream. And, we tend to overlook the role of luck in all these things, right? But attitude is one thing we can change, and it is free. You do not have to go to a gym. You do not have to pay an expert. Reading my book is a good start. My book is not free, but again, there are tons and tons of free resources on oldschool.info. And one of which is a terrific book. I don't know if it's available in Australia, but I bet it is, by Becca Levy, called Breaking the Age Code. And the subtitle is How Your Beliefs About Aging Affect How Long and How Well You Will Live. And I know Becca, she is a very cautious physician. And I was saying for years, I wish you'd, come out and say something, more definitive about the health effects of ageism. And boy, did she. And it is her research that shows that people with more positive age beliefs live 7.5 years longer. I
oh,
don't
I've read
say
that.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, everyone's heard that one. I don't like to say more positive age beliefs because that sounds like you're pushing the scary stuff under the rug. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are real things to worry about aging, getting sick, running out of money, ending up alone. Those fears are real, and we need to admit that, right? And not put sort of a happy spin on that. But so I like to say people with a more a more accurate understanding of aging live longer, we heal quicker, walk faster. And my favorite of Becca's studies shows that we are less likely to develop Alzheimer's, even if we have the gene that predisposes us to the disease. And the thinking is that that having a more accurate attitude, it acts as a buffer against stress. We know stress is bad for us. If you can't find your car keys and you think, oh my God, that's the sign of dementia. No, it's not. Your kid forgot the car keys too, right? Kids lose things all the time. If you don't remember what your car keys are for, that's, seriously. I mean, Alzheimer's is a terrible, terrible disease, but our fears are so out of proportion to reality. And there's a wonderful, sobering quote by a scholar named Amos Wilson here in the US. He says, if you want to understand any problem in the US, and I would say any problem under capitalism, don't look at who suffers from it. Look at who profits from it.
Mm,
Right? Look at the
love
beauty
that.
industry. Look at the pharmaceutical industry. Look at the diet industry. They profit from our fears. And
Yes.
those fears sicken us and shorten our lives.
Absolutely. It's the same thing with cancer. When I went through cancer, I can't believe the number of people that are like this diet and that vitamin. I said, no. Or even like you say, the pharmaceutical people complain about big pharma, but the vitamin industry is holding its own with big pharma. That's like,
I
wow.
bet. I bet. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Look at who profits. Look at where the messages come from and what purpose they serve. Right? They serve to fill you with fear. They serve to, have you compare yourselves, especially women to other women. How does she look? Who looks better? All that stuff, which is just toxic.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I mean,
we
it's irresistible. I do it too. No judgment. But it's not it's not my finest way of thinking.
Yeah, so we've got to, but like you said in the beginning, you're guilty of a lot of ageist language yourself, and it wasn't until I started this and listened to some of your videos, I thought, oh my God, I'm so ageist. You just can't help it, and
That's the
self-depreciating
first step.
humor, and
The first step is that honest admission, because you can't combat bias if you're not aware of it. And that is, it's the most uncomfortable step. But right after you, I mean, I'd like, if this is true to your experience, I hope you would speak to it. It is not fun to realize that you've been brainwashed and you have colluded to some degree. You used that word before, and it's a very powerful word. I don't usually lead with it because I don't want people to feel guilty, right? That's not useful to anyone. But right around the corner, once you see it in yourself, then you start to see it automatically in the world around you, right? And
yeah,
that's what consciousness raising does. That's what catalyzed the women's movement. It's like, oh, it's not that I'm a bad person, right? It's that this stuff is embedded in the culture around me. And that means we can come together and do something about it.
yeah. I think that's where we get so confused as well. Like if I saw an older person standing up on a bus, uh, am I being ageist if I assume that I should give up my seat for her because of her age? You know what I mean?
That's
So,
one of the hardest questions I've ever been asked. I started a blog called Yo, Is This Ageist? In imitation, with permission of a wonderful blog called Yo, Is This Racist? Where people send in questions. And it's tricky. I mean, the textbook answer I would give after much thinking, is that you should offer your seat to anyone who looks like they might use it, might need it. And the truth is, older people are more likely to be unsteady on their feet. That's a fact, right? But a pregnant person, anyone with a cane or whatever, the trick there is to offer it in such a way that they can say no, right? Don't
mm.
jump up like Sir Galahad and make a big deal. And if that person says, drop dead, how dare you, you insolent twit, take a deep breath, because the reason it's really important. The reason they are offended by a kind offer on your part is because they haven't worked through their own internalized ageism or ableism. This is really about disability, right? God forbid I should look so old that my body's falling apart, or that I'm frail, or that I'm weak, especially for men. I mean, I have heard countless doctors say, my patient so-and-so, she's generally speaking about older people, but not always. She's unsteady on her feet. One woman had MS. I wish she would use a cane. They won't do it. My partner and I have a close friend. He's been diagnosed with Parkinson's. He walks so slowly now. He will not use a cane because of the stigma. And that's
Mm.
just, it's less safe and it harms us all.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why we worry about, my dad's in his 80s and he just put scaffolding all around his house and was up on the scaffolding painting the house himself. And we're like, Dad, get down, get down. And, he didn't want to be treated like he was
I
old. Of
mean,
course he was capable of doing it.
it's tricky. None of us want people to tell us what we can and can't do. And so a worse example of that is taking the car keys away, painting, if he's up there on the scaffold, he probably is up for it. I mean, maybe you could see if you could get someone to help him with it, and just see how he's doing. But we do want to be able to make our own decisions. But on the other hand, there's so much stigma around acknowledging that you need help. That's probably the most, important piece of advice I could give, easier to give than to follow. But ask for help. Ask for help. Accept those helping hands. Practice before you need them. I mean, I started asking for help, carrying my bag down the subway stairs or lifting it up. And now that I've had a shoulder replacement, I need that help.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not about denying that you're getting older or there being a stigma to getting older. It's just this is the where you're at in the continuum because we
But the
are all getting older.
resistance, the resistance involves looking at yourself and pushing back the denial and the idea that asking for help in some way reduces your value as a human being.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
that value is We all need help lifelong, where none of us is independent ever.
No. Oh my gosh, that's so true. That's so true. So I know you're pressed for time. Can I just ask you, what led you to even get into this field, into
Um,
studying ageism?
I was in my mid 50s and I realized this getting old thing was happening to me. And started I started interviewing people over 80 who work, inspired by my in-laws who were booksellers. They have since died. And who were being asked all the time, so when are you going to retire? And my mother-in-law said, write about that. And I thought, okay. And learning about longevity, and just realized in a matter of months, if not weeks, that everything I thought I knew about late life was flat out wrong or way off base. And I thought, why are we so afraid when the evidence is all around us? Again, not that the scary stuff isn't real, but that the vast majority of older people are out in the world in ways that bring them contentment and pleasure and purpose.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? When we started the podcast, I was thinking we'd be able to inspire and motivate and educate and support people who were afraid of everything to do with aging. But so far, everybody we meet who's particularly telling their own personal story, they're embracing being older, and it's certainly not everybody, but most people are
No, but
finding joy
they
and
have begun
meaning.
the
And
task of examining their attitudes. I mean,
mm,
it's a little tricky because I think, when I describe my own swing of the pendulum, I think a lot of times people, when they start to get older and they're like, hang on, there's a lot of things about this that I'm actually enjoying. I mean, I think for older women, it's a time of power and liberation for a lot of us, but it's important not to fall into the really seductive trap that if I just, again, eat enough kale, do enough exercise, that I can postpone, that I won't get old, that I won't encounter disability. And you will.
yes.
So it's important not to frame it as a binary. These things won't happen to me, but they will. But I will. But simply by acknowledging that they will, I'm going to rob them of some of their terror, a lot of their terror. Right? I'm not going to spend all this time on the hamster wheel of denial. That's a big relief. That saves a lot of energy. And look around you, at how people are adapting, and prepare yourself. And then, not all those things will come to pass, but it won't feel like defeat when
Mm,
some of them do, and you'll be able to be just less afraid and more in the moment.
yeah. So, what are the antidotes to ageism? What can we do right now to start combating ageism?
Um, well, what you can do right now is to think about your own attitudes. Really look at your own attitudes towards the age and aging. The minute you think about someone's age, think about what associations click into place. Um, think about how you use the words old and young. That's a good starting place. When people say, I don't feel old, what they really mean is, I don't feel ugly. I don't feel incompetent. I don't feel invisible. Well, I felt all those things more acutely at 13 than I've ever felt since. They don't have to do with how old we are. So try and break that habit of associating young with insert good thing and old with insert, negative thing, right? And another, and work on also, it's very important to have friends of all ages.
Mm,
And we live in a very age segregated society. I think it's especially bad in the US, but I think everything's especially bad in the US. So the next time you get to a meeting or a social event, try and break the habit of making a beeline for people your own age. At a dinner party, sit next to someone who's significantly older or younger than you. You may find them boring as can be, or odious, but they're not going to be odious because they're older or younger. They're going to be odious because you don't like them, right? Or because of what
yes.
you do or don't have in common. And that, it's just like diversifying your friend group in any other way. Think of something you like to do and find a mixed age group to do it with. That's what you
Yeah.
can do now.
They
And
have done studies on that, haven't they? And I know we've got a group here called the Men Shed, and it's for older men to go and find companionship and communicate the way men communicate. But they always have young men come to the Men's Shed as well, because
great.
they can learn from the wisdom that comes with the older men, and the older men are more energized by being around
Well,
the young
I'm
fellas.
sure, I think it's also important, I'm sure the younger men have a thing or two to teach the older men. It's not like wisdom flows in one direction. And I will say, also educate yourself about ageism. And I sound like I'm like hawking the old school clearinghouse like big pharma, but almost everything there is free except the books. And it's oldschool.info, and you can see little videos, you can see infographics. There's so much stuff on there. It's searchable by topic. There's language guides. There's so sniff around there, and educate yourself to some of the ways that ageism shows up, and what it looks like, and what you can do about it. It's a whole toolkit.
That's fabulous, Ashton. Thank you. I'm going to let you go and enjoy the rest of your holiday and put your feet up after your big day.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
you
you.
just got one last word of wisdom to help people out there who are struggling with being older?
Listen, aging is hard. Being old is hard. Being young is hard too. Right? We live in a culture that amplifies our fears about aging in order to sell us stuff we don't need, and in order to pit older people against younger people, right? They pit the interests of the young against the old, just like racism pits the interests of white people against people of color, when what we really need to do is come together, right? Against the vested interests that profit when we're squabbling. I mean, that those forces, look at who profits from the problem. That's who we should be joining forces against. They come in all sizes, they come in all shapes, they come in all genders, right? But don't let age be the reason. Don't, when someone says, sorry, I'm going on too long, so maybe you should stop it right there. But there's so much stuff now in the U.S. because the so many politicians are so old. The problem is not their age. The issue is competence. The problem is a political system where you can buy yourself into political office, and where it's really hard to unseat someone who doesn't have money, right? The problem is not that, is not age. It's never age. It's never age.